Okay, good morning. My name's Andrew Ledbetter and I'm one of the officers that advises and supports members of Cheshire Fire Authority. This is only our second full meeting of the Fire Authority by Skype. So if from time to time we're a bit slow or we're a bit deliberative, bear with us. Now, the meeting's been conducted in accordance with the remote meeting rules, which can be found on the Cheshire Fire Rescue Service website. And the agenda for this meeting can also be found there. I've had confirmation that the meeting is being successfully broadcasted on YouTube, and just before the broadcast began, I checked to make sure that all of the participants in the meeting were connected and able to take part. I would normally be sat in a room with a number of officers, but I'm separate from the meeting today, unfortunately, but a number of the officers are at Sadler Road. Everyone else joining the meeting is remote, so all the members are sat at different locations, and whilst it's our intention to have pictures and sound, you'll notice that most of the pictures will be switched off fairly regularly, simply because broadband sometimes just can't support images as well as sound. So with the help of colleagues, I'll monitor connections throughout the meeting. If people drop out of the meeting, they are able to join by phone, and some people have to join by phone anyway because of their broadband connection. The only time the meeting will have to stop for sure is if the broadcast stops. It's a requirement to have the broadcast on. Now, just bear with me a minute because I want to make sure that the sound on the broadcast is working before I hand over to Councillor Bob Rudd. Actually, I believe that the sound has gone off. So, can I just suggest that everyone turns off the microphones and cameras and we just find out what the problem is? So bear with me for 2 minutes, please. Right, that was a quick 2 minutes. I'm told the sound is back on. The broadcast is now back on. So I'm now going to hand over to Councillor Rudd, but can I just confirm attendees? We've got most of the members are attending. There are a couple of people, or 4 people have had to submit their apologies. We've got 1 member who's joined by phone, which makes it slightly more complicated for us because they can't use the chat function, which we use to monitor the way the meeting runs. But as I say, we'll do our best to make things flow. So I can hand over now to Councillor Bob Rudd. From now on, I'll be addressing members of the Fire Authority.
Thank you, Andrew. For those listening to or watching our meeting, I'm Councillor Bob Rudd, Chair of the Fire Authority for 2020 and 2021. I'm now going to take us through the agenda. Item 1A is recording of meetings. First of all, I would like to welcome everybody to our second virtual CFA meeting. I'm sure we're now getting used to the idea of meeting virtually and using the technology, but it doesn't come anywhere near having a real meeting. But we have to do what we have to do in these circumstances. I'd certainly like to thank the staff in Democratic Services and senior management team and all those in the IT department who've been helping get members to get online. So thanks for that. And I understand that the auditors are still trying to connect. So I haven't heard that they've actually managed to yet. Before we go through the agenda, there's a few pieces of housekeeping. I'm not in the same room as the officers, and I will from time to time ask them to confirm things to me, such as which members have indicated they wish to speak on any item and whether everyone remains connected to the meeting. Members will use the chat function in Skype if they wish to speak, and we'll also use it if there are any votes necessary. Officers and members should make sure that they use their name before speaking so that people know who is saying what. Officers and members should also make it clear which page, paragraph, etc. they are concerned with if they are referring to any document. We're going to do our best to make the meeting as clear as possible, and you will find it much easier to understand if you're referring to the agenda pack. I'm now going to move on to item 1B. We did a roll call before the meeting started, and I understand, Andrew, you're going to tell us now the most up-to-date apologies.
Yes, Chair. We've got apologies from councillors Mannion, Nicholas, Parry, and Wheeler, and we've been unable to get hold of Councillor Biggin. So we've got 5 people that are absent at the moment.
Thank you, Andrew. Item 1C is Chair's announcements, and I know the officers have circulated the Chair's announcements electronically, and hopefully you've had a chance to read the document. I'd like to mention a couple of things. Firstly, the continuing work to support partners and the community dealing with COVID-19, and to name a couple of examples, the delivery of the 8,000th prescription, swab testing of patients due to have hospital procedures, and initial indications from the recent inspection by Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary Fire and Rescue Services are that the service is performing well during COVID-19. Secondly, there's been a fantastically impressive effort by firefighters and other staff regarding the firefighters charity. A challenge was created by the charity that has led to around £180,000 being raised across the country, and Cheshire has contributed 40,000 of this. That's over 20%. Well done to all those who've taken part in the event and challenges, and thanks to all those who've made a contribution to this fantastic charity. Finally, can members make a note of the upcoming workshops on equality, diversity and inclusion mentioned at the end of the announcement? Please contact Democratic Services to book a place. Do any members wish to make any comments or speak on that item?
No one's indicated, no, Chair.
No, thank you. If we can move on to declaration of members' interests, item 1D.
Chair, Gina Lewis. I'm a member of the Cheshire Pensions Board.
Okay.
Chair, Councillor Houston, I'm also a member of the pension.
Okay. Anyone else? Those on the phone?
No one's indicated, Bob. No one else was indicated.
Thank you. Item 1E is the minutes of the Fire Authority of the 1st of July. These can be found on pages 1 to 10. Are you happy to accept them? I believe there was somebody wishing to speak on these.
Councillor Delaney indicated he wished to speak.
Happy to support.
Thank you, Chair. It's on matters arising from the minutes, Chair. So, I mean, happy to accept the minutes.
Okay.
It's a matter arising.
Right. Okay. Can I confirm that the minutes are correct?
Chair, can I move the minutes correct? It's Councillor Steph Nelson.
Agreed. That's agreed.
Agreed.
Okay. Councillor Delaney, what's your matters arising from the minutes?
Thank you, Chair. Page 7, paragraph 5, just at the last line there, the paragraph starts, a member asked for further information from the the last line says, however, he confirmed that the FBU would be consulted. That's the Assistant Chief Fire Officer. Just to ask, can you confirm that they have been consulted?
Okay. Who wishes to answer that one? Chief Fire Officer has said yes, they have.
Thank you.
Okay, if we can now move on.
Bob? Hello, Bob.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I remind members of the Labour group that we had a meeting earlier this week and that we discussed matters pertaining to the agenda in advance? It's always helpful to raise it there as well, if people have got concerns. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Harris.
Chair, just to mention, unfortunately, as you know, I had trouble getting in, so I must have missed that part.
Okay. Item 1F is the minutes of the Performance and Overview Committee. There are two sets of minutes, the 22nd of July and the 2nd of September. These can be found on pages 11 to 26 inclusive. Are you happy to receive them?
Chair, can I move them? Councillor Steph Nelson.
Agreed. Is there any dissent?
No.
Are there any members wishing to speak?
No one's indicated, Chair.
Okay, thank you. You happy to receive them? Thank you.
Yes, Chair.
Item 1G is the minutes of the closure of accounts committee. Can be found on pages 27 to 30 inclusive. Are you happy to receive them?
Councillor Nelson, happy to move them, Chair.
Thank
Councillor
you.
Harris, agreed.
Thank you. Anyone wish to speak on those?
No one's indicated.
What about on the phone? That's
Councillor Bailey will shout up if she needs to, Chair.
excellent. Okay, we'll receive those. Thank you. Item 1H is the Governance and Constitution Committee, pages 31 to 36. You happy to receive those?
With them, Chair. Councillor Ryan.
Yeah.
Thank you. Is anyone wishing to speak to those?
No one's indicated.
Thank you. And you happy for us to receive them?
Agreed.
Good.
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 1I is the notes of the pension board found on page 37, 42. Happy to receive those?
Yeah.
Thank you. Anyone wish to speak on those?
No one's indicated.
No. We're happy to receive those. Thank you.
Yes, Chair.
Item 1J is the updated programme of meetings. Page 43. Any comments? Okay, if we can now move on to items requiring discussion or a decision. And can I ask officers at this stage to confirm that everyone is connected, please?
I'm just counting up the names, Chair. Just bear with me a second. Yes, the people who started the meeting are still all connected.
Okay. Do we know if the external audit
They are
group
online, Chair, yes.
Michael Green and Jed Small? Yeah. Okay, if we can now move to item 2, page 45, the external audit finding report 2019-20. I'd like to welcome Michael Green and Jed Small to the meeting, and I understand that Michael's going to take us through the report. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I will certainly introduce the report to yourselves, and Jed will take you through some of the more detailed points within it. So I'll start with the headlines of our report on our page number 3. The audit of the financial statements is substantially complete. That's subject to the completion of a small number of outstanding matters as set out on that page. Key to those is the receipt of assurances in respect of the local government pension scheme from the pension fund auditor. Their work has been a little delayed and impacted due to COVID-19, and that's particularly around the extra complexities around the valuation of direct property investments and other hard to value assets. COVID-19 has also had an impact on the audit of the Fire Authority itself, mainly because all of the work that we've done has been done remotely. That's a first for us and the finance team. But we're pleased to say that, whilst the audit has taken a little longer than in previous years, technology has served us well in that regard, and meant that we've been able to gain all of the assurances and supporting evidence that we've asked for and needed to be able to arrive at a conclusion in terms of the assurances around your financial statements. And as part of that, really would like to pass on our thanks to the finance team for all the support that they've given us over, what has been quite a difficult period. Sticking with the COVID theme, the other impact, other than the significant risk that we identified related to COVID in terms of the financial statements themselves, is that whilst we do anticipate issuing an unqualified opinion on the financial statements in the coming weeks, this will include an emphasis of matter paragraph. That's in respect of a material uncertainty relating to the valuation of authority land and buildings. That emphasis of matter paragraph is not a qualification within the opinion. It simply draws attention to the uncertainties in valuation of property and equipment, and reflects the disclosure that the authority has itself included within the financial statements. And this is a feature that will be included in all local government audit opinions, and was also included within NHS opinions earlier this year. So it's not something that's just specific to the authority. As part of our audit, we've identified just one material adjustment to the financial statements, and that's around the pension fund liability, and it was actually a £2.3 million reduction in the liability that was included within the draft financial statements. The adjustment itself arose following the publication of the proposed remedy in regard of the MacLeod legal case that you're probably aware of, was a feature in last year's audit, and the pension actuaries actually notified the authority that there would be a potential impact as a result of the remedy, and management obtained revised IAS 19 valuations on the back of that, which gave rise to the 2.3 million reduction, which management have adjusted for within the financial statements. So finally, from myself, and as set out on page 5 of our report, is alongside the anticipated unqualified opinion on the financial statements, we also anticipate to issue an unqualified opinion on value for money arrangements at the authority, based on the work that we have completed in response to identified risks, and also just to confirm that we've not had to exercise any of our other statutory powers during the year. So they're the key headlines, and I'm pleased to say that you have, or we do expect to issue those unqualified opinions, and Jed will take you through some of the findings in response to the risks in a little more detail.
Thank you, Michael. Jed?
Yes, so the first thing you need to do is start by confirming a slight change from our original audit plan in terms of the level of materiality threshold we were working to. Our plan was based basically on information from the previous year's financial statements, and we estimated that materiality would be around £730,000. That's on your page 52 of the pack. On receipt of the draft accounts, we reassessed what would be a material figure, and we increased our materiality level to £851,000. And that's set out with its impact on page 52. So in terms of the significant risks, in terms of what we did with COVID, we realized that the risks arose out of the fact that there'd be remote working arrangements put in place for the authority staff and potentially redeployment of staff depending upon the severity of the outbreak. We also recognized that there would be volatility in financial and property markets, and that would impact potentially on financial forecasts, which drove us around to the decision that we should treat it as a significant risk. In response, we engaged with management to understand what the implications were for working and what impact there was on the authority's ability to prepare financial statements. And we were satisfied that alternative arrangements were set up appropriately with adequate access to staff to systems from remote locations, but without any significant loss of security or integrity to those systems. We were able to assess whether or not the audit could process in the normal manner, whether it was possible to get sufficient audit evidence through remote technology. And although that took some additional work and additional procedures, we were able to do that, making use of video calls and secure screen sharing so that we could witness and confirm processes being completed, transactions being recorded, and also some innovative use of photography to verify fixed assets of the authority. So we haven't identified any further material impacts as a consequence of COVID this year. We, in our plan, set out our approach to rebutting what's known as the reputable risk in revenue recognition. Essentially, this is an assertion within the auditing standards that auditors have to start from the point of view that there is a risk that revenue might not be appropriately recognised, and then work to rebut that. We did that in our audit plan, and we've revisited that assessment, and we're happy that there was no need to change it, and the risk of incorrect revenue recognition does not apply in the case of the authority. So moving on now to what is page 54 of the pack. A risk that is prescribed by auditing standards that we cannot rebut is the one of management override of controls. And to address this, we focused our work on, first of all, making sure that the control system around significant journals and adjustments was properly designed and effective. And then we undertook a series of tests to identify unusual or what we deemed high-risk journals. So they'd be journal adjustments to the accounts, either posted by senior management or at unusual times, or for unusual amounts or unusual accounts. I'm happy to say that we were able to substantiate all the journals and adjustments that were made within the financial statements, both at the year end and during the course of the year. And we've not identified any indication of management override of controls. The valuation of land and buildings, we identified this as a significant risk. originally, because of its size, the size of the figures involved, and the fact that in order to arrive at that value, management has to make use of an expert from outside the field of accountancy. The impact of COVID did raise the question about the validity of those valuations, and subsequent to us issuing our plan, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors themselves issued a practice notice to its members, alerting them to the impact of COVID and the volatility on property markets that fell as a consequence of that. And as a consequence, the valuers have reported that all their valuations are based on the assumption of a material valuation uncertainty. Our response, well, our response started off with what management's processes were for obtaining this valuation, making sure that appropriate assumptions were provided to the valuer, that the scope of their work was adequate for the purposes of producing a report for the accounts. We engaged directly with the valuer to confirm those were the assumptions used, to check the calculations, and to challenge some of the comments and adjustments that were made as part of the valuation process. We were able to obtain appropriate assurance that those assumptions were used correctly, and that any judgments that were made were supported by objective evidence. So an example of that is that we've made use of sites like Zoopla and the land registry to confirm recent transactions and property prices to support the valuer's conclusions. And indeed, the valuer even referenced the use of Zoopla themselves as an objective source for finding information about the state of the current property market. So consequently, we were happy with the methods and calculations used, and we were able to get the evidence we needed. As mentioned, because this happens after the COVID outbreak, this is the issue of the advice by RICS. The original draft accounts did not include reference to this material valuation uncertainty, and after discussions with management, they agreed it was entirely appropriate to include it, and have included it in the financial statements. And in the report, we said at the time of drafting this report, we were still under review, but we'd not identified any further issues, and can confirm that we haven't found any further issues in relation to the work of the valuers or the valuation of property. So moving on to, I think it's page 55 of the pack. We talk about the valuation of the pension fund, and again the same sort of principles apply here. It's a very large number, and management are dependent upon the work of experts from outside the field of accountancy to help them determine the appropriate estimate for the financial statements. And our work followed a similar process, in that we first set out to establish that management had set up a proper process in order to obtain that valuation, that they'd issued proper instructions to their expert, which in this case was the actuary, and then we did some work to assess the competence and capability of the actuary and the methods and techniques that they use. We did this through engagement with the actuary in the similar ways we did with the property valuer, and also by making use of an auditor's own expert. There was a consulting actuary retained on behalf of the audit firms, who provides an assessment of the work of the actuaries in general, and also provides us with some help in targeted testing. We were able to complete our tests, and we're comfortable at the outcome and the valuations that we obtained. As we mentioned, during the course of preparing the accounts and going through the audit, a remedy to the McLeod case was proposed, and that gave enough information for the valuation of the liability to be reassessed. Management have done that, and there's been a reduction in the liability. The impact of the Cheshire pension fund is the one that is just delaying our work at the moment. Having looked at the work of the valuer, moving on to page 56, we then have to consider whether it's appropriate for management to use that valuation in preparing the accounts, because it is ultimately management's decision what value properties are reported at. And we've set out on there that this were criteria we use to judge whether management had made an appropriate judgment, and we were satisfied that they had. And on page 57, we describe a similar process for our assessment of whether it was appropriate for management to use the actuaries' reports as a basis of preparing the valuation of the pension fund liability. Going concern is an unusual issue for local authorities. Although statutory bodies are able to assume that they remain a going concern unless there's actually some legislation in process to bring about their end, the accounting and reporting framework requires management nonetheless to make an assessment of the appropriateness of applying the going concern concept, and it requires auditors to evaluate that assessment. This has been sort of highlighted this year by the impact of COVID, both the impact on general business levels anyway, but also as part of the COVID response, the ability of public bodies to support the economy by settling their debts as they fall due. And our work focused around verifying that that was indeed the case, and we were satisfied that it is appropriate for the going concern basis to be applied, and there were no material uncertainties to that basis. There are some other matters that were required to bring to your attention arising out of our audit work. These relate to control failures that we identified during the course of the audit. I think I must stress in both these cases that although it was a failure of a control that we identified, or a weakness in a control, there was no evidence that that failure or weakness led to any kind of error or misrepresentation or misstatement in the financial statements. In the first instance, the weakness was around the authorization process for a large transaction. In that the authorization process relied upon confirmation from an email from a budget holder, and when it was examined, it was clear that the response that was provided wasn't really explicit about which transactions were to be authorized. We discussed this with management, and management agreed that it was essentially an oversight, but there was an inherent weakness in that process, and they agreed that they would put into place arrangements to strengthen that authorization process. The second area was around the Xps Payroll Services that's provided from an outside provider. The service they provide is simply as a processing service. Most of the responsibility for the inputs that they use rest with the fire authority. So in a sense, it's a relatively low risk service. However, it's the authority did not have an external assurance report about the controls operated by that service. Now, it is common for service providers to provide these sorts of assurance reports, but it's not essential. We've discussed this with management, and management have reviewed the control reports that are available and have determined that the level of additional assurance available from them would not be sufficient to make it worth the authority's time and effort obtaining those assurance reports. And we're comfortable that management have made that decision on an objective basis. The other matters then that we set out are our reporting responsibilities under the audit code and under other areas relating to our duty as auditors in the public sector, and we are happy to report that we have no matters to raise with you, and we have not had to exercise any of our statutory duties. And that finishes the work on the financial statement side. The other aspect of our opinion, as Michael said, is the value for money conclusion. And on pages 62 and 63 of the pack, we set out our findings in respect of the risk that we identified on the value for money conclusion. We identified two areas for our work to focus on. One was financial sustainability, and the other was the impact of COVID happening as it did towards the end of the year. And happy to say that we found that the authorities' arrangements were adequate in both senses. So there continues to be effective budget monitoring and performance against budget throughout the year. There are arrangements in place to actively manage investments and borrowing in cash and ensure that the authority is able to both meet its current demands for settling accounts and provide resources for its continued development and capital program. And in respect of COVID, the remote working and the business continuity arrangements worked effectively. And particularly important, we found there was no weakening of the control environment at a transactional level or at a governance level. So we're satisfied in all respects that the authority has appropriate arrangements for securing value for money. The final part of our report, which starts on page 64, are to confirm our independence. We have to do this every year, both at the start of the audit cycle when we introduce our plan and again when we present our report at the end before issuing our opinion. In Appendix A of our report, we've documented in a little more detail the recommendations we made in response to the control weaknesses we identified, and thereafter we document the amendments that we made in conjunction with management to the financial statements. They were mostly disclosure changes and narrative changes rather than any adjustments to the primary values in the primary statements, the only one of which was in relation to the pension fund liability. Thereafter that, we set out some things again that we're required to report under the standards, which is confirmation of the fees that we charge during the course of the year, and report to you a draft of the opinion we propose to give once we're in a position to finalise the position around the Cheshire Pension Fund impact on the authority's financial statements. So that concludes my presentation now, and I think it's over to members.
Thanks, Jed and Michael. I've got to say welcome to Councillor Biggins, who's joined the meeting. And I've also read that Councillor Holbrook has a question. I'll let you read it out, Councillor Holbrook.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just a question around the property market. I'm really interested to know whether COVID's affecting commercial and public body properties the same ways and to the same extent as it does to private properties, which seem to be increasing in value at the moment. So is there a correlation there, or is it a totally different story?
Shall I take that, Michael?
Yeah, you can have a go.
Yeah. Yes, they are very different for simpler reason that the commercial property tends to be valued on the basis of a capitalization of the income stream that comes from that property. So where tenants are unable to occupy their premises and there are rent break clauses where tenants are struggling financially and unable to meet their bills, the revenue stream that those commercial properties can generate becomes less secure and less valuable. So that it does tend to have a direct impact there. For public bodies, well, public bodies aren't immune. They, a lot of larger authorities in particular own commercial premises. They own, small retail units. They own industrial units. They own large commercial shopping centres, and they are just as vulnerable to changes in the commercial renting market as anybody else. In terms of actual public property itself, the value of the public estate, that is a little different. That tends to be valued on the basis of the cost of replacing that asset, or the value of the services that are derived from using that asset. That in itself is less clear, but there is still a general link to the property market. So obviously, if where the asset is valued on the basis of its replacement cost, anything that has a depressive effect on the building and construction industry will have a depressing effect on the building materials prices as the market slows. So essentially, yes, COVID does affect commercial and public body property prices, but potentially in the opposite way than is being experienced in the local housing market.
Thank you, that's really helpful.
Thanks. Are there any other questions from members of the auditors?
No one else has indicated, Chair.
Then, if there's no further questioning, are we happy to note the audit findings report?
Can I move the report, Chair? It's Steph Nelson.
Thank you. If there's no dissent from that, then I'm going to make the assumption that we accept the auditor's findings report, and it's noted. Thank you. I also want to thank Michael and Jed for their presentations this morning, taking us through, which is a somewhat complex document. I'm sure they find it easy, but people like me find it difficult. But thank you anyway. If we can now move on to the next item. Something to say, Andrew? No. Okay, we're now on item 3, page 75. The final accounts 2019-20 and the annual governance statement. And I think I would like to thank Wendy Bevington and her team for the work that they've done on the final accounts and the annual governance statement. Alan Rainford, the Treasurer, is going to take us through this report. So over to you, Alan.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. I'm Alan Rainford. I'm the Treasurer of the Fire Authority. I'll make just a couple of general points, and then I'll hand over to Wendy, who will explain how the adjustment to the pension liability figure that the external auditors referred to, how that impacts on a number of pages within the statement of accounts. What's before you today is obviously the final statement of accounts for the last financial year. The draft statement of accounts were considered at the Closure of Accounts Committee on the 22nd of July. I had explained to the Closure of Accounts Committee that the accounts include the accounting cost of providing services in the 1920 financial year. Often these accounting costs are very different to the sort of figures that we see in the budget. The budget includes costs that are financed from the council tax, from government grants, and from business rate income. So as the external auditor has indicated, there's been a change relating to the value of pensions liabilities, and this affects the accounting costs. The adjustment doesn't therefore impact on the revenue outturn position. So the underspend at the year end that was reported at the Fire Authority meeting on the 1st of July, that underspend hasn't changed. And therefore the level of usable reserves that we have and that we rely upon to finance expenditure in the future, that hasn't been impacted by this adjustment. That hasn't changed. I'd also like to thank Wendy and the finance team for the work of producing the accounts. The rules relating to the accounts, these international financial reporting standards, are incredibly complex, and the task of producing the accounts has been made more difficult this year with the COVID pandemic and the implications this has had in terms of remote working and the challenges of getting working papers to the auditors and being available to support the work of the auditors. So I would like to register my thanks to Wendy and the joint finance team. If I can refer you just to the recommendations on page 75. One of the recommendations relates to the approval of the accounts with the audit opinion when that's finally available. Obviously, the approval of the accounts and the publishing of the accounts with the audit opinion will mean that the authority has complied with the statutory deadline. That statutory deadline was extended to the 30th of November because of the COVID pandemic. The fourth recommendation relates to the letter of representation, which is set out in Appendix 2. Again, we can't sign that letter of representation today. That can only happen when the audit opinion has come in from the external auditors. But at least approval, we're looking for approval today to release that letter of representation when the audit opinion has been received. That's really all I wanted to say on the accounts, Chair. I'll ask Wendy just to take you through some of the changes to the draft accounts that have occurred.
Thanks, Alan.
Good morning, members. Thank you very much. I want to start by looking at page 76 of the pack and the changes to the statement of accounts. As Jed and Alan have spoken about, the McLeod Sargent Employment Tribunal litigation has impacted on last year's accounts and the accounts we are considering today. And I will draw your attention to those changes as we go through the accounts. The rest of the account changes generally are in the notes to the accounts. These are additional pieces of information that we provide to the primary statements, and I will go through those as we come across them. Key thing to be mindful of is that none of these changes have, as Alan said, made any impact on our outturn position or our usable reserves. These are purely accounting changes to ensure that we are reporting the most up-to-date and inclusive figures. There will be one final check at the end of it where we put the audit opinion in to make sure all the page numbers flow through. So the page numbers may have to change, or paragraph numbers, but those will be the only other changes we will make. So if I can draw members' attention to page 81 of the pack and the start of the final accounts and the narrative report. The narrative report is a key part of the statement of accounts for communicating to our stakeholders our purpose, how we performed and how we allocated resources and the outcomes we achieved in year. It draws attention to the future developments, and this year, of course, we can't get away from mentioning COVID within the actual narrative report. But because the changes identified through the audit, none of that actual narrative report has changed. So if we move then on to page 95 and the expenditure funding and analysis note, and we also have the previous year's version on page 96, you will see on page 96 a line halfway down the table saying actuarial pension costs, McLeod judgment. Last year we added £22.6 million in to our costs to reflect the increased cost of the McLeod judgment. And if we move back to page 95 at the same line, you will see this year that has reduced because the remedy proposals that had been published and consulted on by the government were slightly harsher than the original viewpoint this time last year, and as a consequence we have reduced those additional costs. That is also reflected in page 97, Comprehensive Income and Expenditure Statement. Again, the actuarial pension cost McLeod judgment line, the 22.6 in 1819, and the reduction by 1.8 in 1920. The other changes to bring up to the full 2 million that Jed spoke about earlier are sitting on the financing and investment line and the gains and losses. So they are shown separately, but they do come to the totality Jed mentioned. So that is the pension side impact. I think the key thing to remember, as Alan pointed out, these are accounting judgments. They are not relating to cash. It is an indication of the cost of our current and future pensioners based on the pension rules and the actuary's view of how much we're going to pay and for how long. I think the next thing I would just like to draw members' attention to are the tables on page 98 and 99, the movement in reserve statements. And there is a column in the middle called Total Usable Reserves. In 1819, we started off with just over 28 million. By the end of the year, we were just over 31 million. This year, for 1920, we started with the 31 million. That has now reduced to 21.5 million, reflecting the investments we've put into building the training centre, the Chester Fire Station, and the refurbishment and other capital schemes that we have had in place this year. So it's just to give members the indication that we have actually utilised just under 10 million of the reserves in line with their agreed capital programme. If I then draw attention to page 101 and the balance sheet, there are a couple of things I just want to emphasise on here. Probably 3/4 of the way down, there is a title long-term borrowing, and we have just over £1 million. That is the amount we actually owe, but there is a note in note 12 that puts a fair value of that, and I will come to that when we get to note 12, but just be aware that is the amount we actually owe in cash terms. The note is referring to fair value. The other thing on this particular page to draw attention to is it looks like we are in hock for just about £423.8 million. That includes the pension liability of £522.6 million. If we took that notional figure out, we have a net figure of 98.8 million in the black. So we are not actually bankrupt. It's the pension liability that makes it such a negative figure. If I then move on to page 105 and the notes to the accounts, in the very first section 1.1 general principles, you will see compared to the draft statements, we have had added in conjunction with the auditor's advice, a comment about we are producing these on a going concern basis. If I then move us on, if I may, to page 121 and the accounting standards which Alan referred to, we have to follow. New accounting standard was going to be brought in this year in relation to leases. It's been deferred due to COVID, and we have added a paragraph on page 121 to reflect this. We have also added to the table at the bottom of page 121 the commentary about the valuation of our land and buildings, and the material valuation uncertainty, which Jed referred to earlier. If I then move members on to page 131, and the table that shows our Public Works Loan Board debt, as I pointed out on the balance sheet, we are showing the 1,012,000. That is the actual amount we owe. However, we are obliged for fair value purposes to say what that valuation would be if it was to be repaid at this moment in time rather upon maturity. Using our external treasury management advisors, they calculated it at 1.2 million. The external auditors valued it slightly less, and there is a difference of about £100,000. It's not an adjusting item, nor needed to be. It's just drawing members' attention to the fact that it's a difference of opinion rather than a matter of fact. In terms of the next adjustment we made, it was on page 143 to the accounts, where we pointed out that the auditors, we paid an extra £4,500 to the audit in 1920, but it related to a variation on the 1819 fees. Over the page, on page 144, we added some further information to the grant income because we restated the 1819 column of figures. The reason we restated them is because we get such a lot of money now from these individual grants, one-off grants. We've tried to break it down to give people better information, and we had to redo the 1819 statement compared to what was published in the accounts to ensure that too had the same granularity. Finally, on page 146, we have put a net table in to help people understand our interaction with the 4 unitary councils, because we have not only council tax, but we also have business rate liabilities within their collection funds. So we now have a net table. Again, in partnership with our auditors, we feel that gives a little bit more clarity. That's all I really wanted to say on the actual accounts and the changes we've made. The last thing I wanted to do is just draw people's attention to the annual governance statement that starts on page 167 of the pack. No changes have been made to that since the draft was received by the Closure of Accounts Committee. There are 3 actions that we recognised to work on in 1920, and on pages 176 and 177 we draw attention to those. It was in relation to financial sustainability, people and collaborations. The sustainability was linked to the whole service review, which we are aware have been completed, and the IRMP you kindly approved at the previous meeting. The people area, a people strategy has been approved, and you are aware we have our new core values in place now. Collaborations strategy has been approved, but there is ongoing focus on collaborations. So when we look, virus has an impact, not only in this year and how we're working and moving into next, but also on the medium-term financial plan, the funding we may get, not only nationally, but locally, and also the impact on the economy and society, and whether or not that will impact on the services we provide. So that is something we are very much focused on. There are also nationally led changes in relation to things such as the Grenfell Tower tragedy, and we need to make sure that we build that into our governance and appropriate controls. And as I said, collaborations is still a work in progress. Finally, you'll be pleased to hear the letter of representation that Alan mentioned, which is on page 179 to 183. It's a standard letter. It is signed by the chair on behalf of all our members. It takes into account all the standard things we've done on your behalf to provide the auditors with the necessary information to give you assurance that the accounts are true and fair. And you've heard that assurance today from Michael and Jed, and I would like to pass on our thanks to them for the cooperation and collaboration we've worked in these trying times together to make sure that we were able to present this to you today. The item on page 183 that shows that we have not adjusted the fair value of the loan as stated in the notes. That is just to give you reassurance. As I said, it is a valuation note rather than any material impact. We still are reporting it appropriately. So I'll leave it at that, and we can go back to the recommendations on page 75, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Alan, for your reporting. I've got Councillor Nelson wishes to raise a comment.
Just make a couple of comments, Chair, for me, on pages 86 through to 88. The new, what we call Fatal 5 for road traffic incidents. We had 46 deaths in 2018 across the Cheshire community. That's not acceptable. And the reasons why we have them is clearly stated there. There was a report today that young people are more and more using their mobile phones while they're driving. I think we need to, as leaders in our communities, need to get across that it's not acceptable for people to do that, because there's not any consequences for people that's using drugs or phones or anything else or drinking. There's consequences for other people in the community. I work with the Cheshire Constabulary. We had an event last July where over 6,000 people attended. An absolutely fantastic weekend, and we need to do more of that. What was a bit disappointed was there's no football clubs mentioned on when we're talking about working within the communities. We Warrington Wolves, and we got Widnes Vikings. They're doing a lot of work in the communities with us. They're also doing a lot of stuff around equality and diversity. I just think we need to, perhaps when we're working with our communities, that we need to say to these people, what are you doing at the end of the day to help the communities? I'm pleased that the co-op has installed a recent mock convenience store at Central Safety at Lymm. That's fantastic, because most of us in our community have a co-op store and they do good work, but we just need to, when we go to schools and things like that, we need to actually say, you know, you need to use Safety Central, because it teaches young children how to be safe, how to eat and look at labelling, and not to be antisocial when they're in stores, and not to be pinching as well. And then the last one is around sprinklers and high-rise buildings. We've done some fantastic work there, and we've actually contributed some money to these firms that's actually put sprinklers in. We need to, when we go to the councils or RSLs, we need to be mindful that we need to say to them, if the flats are not got sprinklers in, you need to get them put in as soon as you can. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Nelson. Is there any other contribution from members? Any questions for Wendy or Alan?
No one's indicated, Chair.
Thank you. We need to move and second the words in the recommendation, if members are comfortable with the 4 recommendations on page 75.
Councillor Nelson, can I move, Chair?
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Is that second?
Brown, I'll second.
Sorry, who was that?
Brown.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. That's good. Do you need me to read them out?
No. No, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay. obviously some arrangement will have to be made at some stage for me to sign the letter. I don't particularly want to do it electronically, so someone will have to get the letter prepared for me to sign and send it off. Okay, then I'm going to ask members to if there's no dissent, I'm assuming that everybody is happy with those recommendations, and we won't take a vote. Are you happy with that, Andrew?
No one's indicated that they wish to speak, so I think if you pause for 5 seconds or so, you can make that assumption and move on. And then you will have approved the annual governance statement and statement of accounts, the movement in reserves, and letter of representation.
Okay. Then we'll move on. Thanks, Councillor Holbrook, for your indication of yes. Thank you. We'll move on then. So the annual government statement, statement of accounts, movement in reserves, and letter of representation are approved. We now go to agenda item 4, which is on page 185, and that is the statement of the assurance 2019-20. Andrew, you're going to take us through this.
Yes. So the authority is required to produce and publish a statement of assurance each year. And we've been doing this for a while now. It starts on page 189 and follows a very similar format to the document that you saw last year and approved last year. The document isn't that long, but would be very long if we included all the items that are referred to in it. So we signpost various other documents which we list in the boxes in the statements, and we put them in a box headed key evidence links. There is some overlap with the annual governance statement, which Wendy just talked about. And rather than sort of go through it, I'm happy to answer any questions. And you know, the recommendation is fairly straightforward. Approve it, subject to any issues that you raise now, and allow the Chief Fire Officer and Chief Executive just to make any final updates. There's a couple of things that need to be finished off, and I'm happy to answer questions if you have any.
Okay. Any questions for Andrew? Any comments?
Councillor Nelson, Chair, can I move that report?
Yeah, Councillor Biggin, did you want to speak? Your mic came on then, but no.
No, I wasn't indicating that I wish to speak. I was just thinking to myself, it is very reassuring, this document of assurance, and I'm always very confident. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Biggin. Okay, it's been moved by Councillor Nelson. Is that seconded?
Seconded by Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. If there's no dissent from any members, including those on the phone, then I believe that we are happy to approve the statement of accounts and to allow the Chief Fire Officer and Chief Exec, Mark Cashin, to make any updates, final changes that he considers necessary. Has any member indicated they wish to speak?
No indications, Chair. No.
Then the statement of assurance 2019-20 is approved. Thank you. We can now move on to the next item, item 5, the annual report, page 209. I believe we have Sarah Dornford-May here to take us through this annual report.
That's correct. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. So the main function of the annual report is to present the statement of accounts, which is on page 7 for 2019-2020. It's put together by several departments, which includes finance, business intelligence, various teams such as prevention and protection, and coordinated by corporate communications, excuse me. We also use it as an opportunity to promote the publication of the IRMP, tell people about their local authority, who's who the members are, who their various fire officers are, and information about their areas. There's a general focus on performance in there, which is on page 6, and we wrap around it a selection of articles that celebrate activities and successes, and we keep these as pan-Cheshire as we can, taking into account as many functions as possible. For example, this year, the tremendous COVID work that staff have been undertaking. We cover road safety, on-call recruitment, new initiatives such as the training centre, youth, safety central, equality and diversity, firefighters charity, and more. This is the second year we have produced it digitally. It was well received last year. We did get several comments from members of the public, commenting on a great way of saving money and so on. There is the option for us to print copies and send on request. We didn't have any requests last year, and producing it this way gives an annual saving of over £60,000. That is, in essence, the annual report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. I would just add that we do print some copies off for libraries, etc., so that they are available, because not everybody has access to the internet at home, and it's obviously good that they can actually see a physical copy if they don't have access to the internet. Now I've got Wendy wishes to speak, and then Councillor Delaney.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to point out on page 217, summary of accounts. Obviously, this was done at the time before we put through all the final audit figures. So the figures within those tables will need to be updated and finalised once we get the audit opinion, to make sure that both the accounts and the annual report match up, just to make members are aware. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, it wouldn't do to have conflicting figures. Councillor Delaney, then Councillor Holbrook.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say what an excellent publication it is. I think it's extremely informative, well planned out, and well focused. It it doesn't dictate, easy reading, just well done.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Holbrook.
Thank you, Chairman. And the annual report, yes, excellent report, and it covers a wide range of issues. I'm just wondering, what kind of response do we get from the general public to the annual report? How many people actually engage with us through the annual report? Which brings me back to how many people from the general public are actually watching this meeting today, and is there a way, if the numbers aren't very great, that we can actually increase our appeal?
Good question. I mean, one of the reasons why we stopped producing a copy for every household was that even when they received that document through their letterbox, we never actually got that much of a comment, and it was a way of saving money painlessly by I think it was 50,000 out of the budget at the time, so it was worthwhile doing. But Sarah, you want to respond? And then Councillor.
Yes, it's just to say that we use all the communications channels available to us to promote the fact that the annual report is published, and there is a link to the website, to the actual page that the annual report's on. So we've tried to reach as many people as possible. It also goes out in our Firelink newsletter. I don't have, I'm afraid, the distribution figures, if you like, the user figures for alert, but it is a considerable amount of people.
Thank you. I mean, I'm not suggesting we go back to putting paper copies through everybody's door, because I can just see how wasteful that was. And we all know you get, what is it, 3 seconds between something going through your letterbox before somebody puts it in the bin. But I'm just wondering, I mean, for example, do you send out the link to all councillors through all the authorities that we have represented here, so they can put them on their own social media? And that would be one way of distributing and getting the message out a bit further. So just sort of cheap and easy things like that I'm thinking of.
Well, that could certainly be done at little cost. I've got Councillor Harris and then Councillor Brown.
Well, just an observation. I don't want to sound like it's constructive criticism in a sense. I think we could streamline it a little bit. I know it's very difficult what you miss out, and in terms of what's in an area, etc. But more importantly, I would think that actually there's the old maxim that silence betokens consent. So I won't worry too much necessarily about you know, the response in that sense, because clearly if people were unhappy, I think we'd know about it, if that's any compliments.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you. Yeah, excellent document. I particularly like the pictures on page 6 and page 7, 8. You know, where the performance stats. It sort of encapsulates, and I think that would resonate with a lot of the members of the public if they saw something like that. I know we got an issue with the distribution. We said let's send stuff out to the unitaries. But actually, local town and parish councillors would probably read this and get a lot of pleasure out of reading this. And I'm just wondering if we could get NALC, which is the National Association of Local Councils, to actually pass that through to the local parish councils, so that local town council and parish councillors could get a copy. Because I think most of those would actually read it and absorb the facts, which would just widen the spread of the knowledge of what we do. That was all.
Thanks, Councillor Brown. Sarah, did you want to respond to that? Is that something that we can do centrally, to send it out to National Association of Local Councils, to the 4 unitaries, so that, you know, if it's just a click of a button on a computer, then that's great. I mean, to send
yes,
it.
It is something that we can do, and I've made a note of all those suggestions, so thank you very much, and I'll ensure that that happens.
And Bob, you've also put 18,000 users on the CFRS alert system.
Yes, I'm being fed figures through from our digital team. They're being very helpful. We've got 49,000 users on Twitter and 29,000 on Facebook.
Excellent. And they're all used so that we can...
yes, we promote already on those.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Bob? Yes, who's
Also
that?
mentioned that where those local authorities still have a civic magazine going out, or civic publication, I know that the fire service sometimes has a page within that civic magazine, normally towards the end of the year, and that's another opportunity. Maybe this year they could, if there's not, you know, obviously higher priorities, that depends with the officers about the, you know, what the message needs to be in that area, they could just republish the page for that area that relates to that particular borough or, you know, city area.
Yeah, thanks for that, Councillor Harris. I think if Sarah, you can have a look at that. And
yes, thank you. Yes.
I don't know what all the authorities do with regards to publications these days, but yeah, if that can be looked at, thank you. Then we are we happy to accept the and approve the annual report?
Chair.
Yeah.
Move the report, Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. That's seconded.
Seconded, yeah. Councillor Biggin.
Thank you, Councillor Biggin. No dissent, then annual report is approved. Thank you. We can now move on to item 6, a review of member training and development, and that's on page 219. Sorry, no, yep, 219. Donna, did you have anything to add to this? And then I'm going to invite the chair of the Gina Lewis to go through the report.
Hi, this is just a review of the member training and development working group over the past 12 months, and I'll pass to Councillor Lewis, who will present the report in further detail.
Thank you. Councillor Lewis.
Hello, Chairman. Yes, we had our meeting yesterday, and we've made a couple of decisions with regard to how we use information and also how we gather feedback. If we go through the report, you'll see that we have got a work programme. Obviously, what has been decided for 2019-20 was severely disrupted by COVID-19, but we have actually managed to ensure that new members have proceeded through their induction, and I think that all the new members have actually now had their various meetings and so on, whether remotely or in person, and I think they've also visited Safety Central. So as far as we possibly can do, we've now got new members up to date. I think in terms of, if you can turn to pages 2, 3, 4, you'll see there the program that we actually had was quite successful in terms of the attendances. It was only as we got into 2020 and the spring that we then had to start curtailing some of the things that we were going to do. I think as far as most members are concerned, there's been some very positive feedback about the information that has been provided through the briefings from our chief officer and 2 assistant chief officers, and also the information that's been provided by Democratic Services. So I think in some ways our new members have had a more in-depth feel about what's been happening within the Fire Authority in terms of the general knowledge of it. We're looking at how we actually do feedback, certainly from remote meetings, and we're also looking at member development. We've got very few members who haven't completed their personal development, but from what we have had, I think 16 members have completed it. We're beginning to put together a plan for further training. Obviously, visits again haven't been possible, but we are hoping that we will be able to do some socially distanced visits, especially to places like the training centre, which has been a bit disappointing that we've not been able to see that in progress. I'm just wondering whether a record has been kept of the progress there, which might be useful for members to see. I know when I worked in a school that was a building site for the best part of 20 years, and it was one of my jobs to actually keep filming. So I just wondered whether a record has been kept for that. I don't think there's anything else, Chair. If members have got any questions, I'll be quite happy to answer them.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Any questions on that? Does anybody know if a film record has been taken of the progress of the training centre? Mark's just said yes, we've got regular photo progress, so that's good. Any questions from members? No.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I'm now desperately trying to find the page that I need to ask. I've lost the page 219.
Yeah, it's a bit remiss of me, Chair. I forgot to thank the members of the section who prepared the report, and also for the work that was done yesterday at the meeting.
Thanks, Councillor Lewis. Right, I found page 219, and the recommendation is that the review of member training be noted, and if that's been moved and seconded and agreed, because there was no dissent, we'll move on to the next item. No one's indicated, Andrew?
No, Chair. I think you're free to go ahead.
Good, thank you. Then that takes me to item 7, the Integrated Risk Management Plan 2020 to 2024, a review and consultation. And Graham Worrell is going to take us through this. Graham.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. Thank you for having me here today to discuss the intended approach to the review of the Integrated Risk Management Plan for 2020 to 24 and a potential associated consultation activity as well. It's on page 237 of your agenda at the last Fire Authority meeting, and it does outline plans and proposals for the period up 2024, and a summary of this is attached at Appendix 1 on page 241 of your agenda. One thing that we did make or have very clear regard to in the development of the IRMP was the requirements set out in the national framework, and they're explained in paragraphs 3 of the report. Moving on to page 238 of your agenda, clearly because the IRMP has only just been signed off and actually a lot of the activities now in train, and those early years of that plan are kind of currently being progressed, and the IRMP itself complies with the frameworks, the national framework. Doesn't feel like it's the most appropriate time to consult. Normally I'd be bringing you an annual update to consult on. It doesn't feel that that's appropriate at this time. However, as time passes with regards to the plan, it may be necessary to update aspects of the document, and therefore it's proposed that actually an annual review of the IRMP will consider compliance with the framework. As time passes, there may be a need to update the plan accordingly, and then that may in turn require some consultation at a future point. However, what we intend to do actually is to provide the first review of the IRMP and present that review to members in the second half of 2021, with a view to a formal report being considered towards the end of that year. It probably is more likely that a review would take place therefore in 2021, 2022. One of the aspects that we have usually tied in with the IRMP consultation because of the timings is the council tax precept consultation. The authority is required to consult on its proposed level of precept for the forthcoming financial year. That's normally, but they're not always tied into the IRMP consultation. So the intention actually would be, though we're not consulting on an IRMP document this year, we would carry out a consultation on the proposed level of precept for the forthcoming financial year. Clearly, there's still uncertainty with regards to the timing of the announcement of the government's local government financial settlement, and that kind of has the impact. That is the most impactful thing with regards to the consultation. So once we know the impact of the financial settlement, we can then launch that consultation. So we are waiting as to when the government deems necessary to make that announcement. Clearly, the results of the consultation will then need to be fed into members in good time for your February meeting where you do set the budget for the forthcoming year. So it's proposed that we would carry out a consultation, most likely in the very early part of 2021, to then feed into that February meeting.
How long would that be?
It would depend, Chair, on the announcement by the government. So the earlier the government can announce the local government financial settlement, the earlier we can consult. We will get things ready to launch and go live, as it were, as soon as the government makes that announcement and we're aware of the impact financially. I'd expect or anticipate if they make that announcement very, very close to Christmas, as has happened in the previous years, that we'd consult from the very start of January for approximately 4 weeks or so. But it does depend on the timing of the government's announcement.
Okay, yeah. Well, that normally occurs around Christmas Eve that we get the notification. But our normal consultation process for the IRMP is 12 weeks. But we clearly won't have that sort of time, so it's going to have to be 3 or 4 weeks if we're going to get the response back in time for a budget meeting that normally takes place mid-February.
Yes, Chair, you're right. We have had precedent before when the government announced the additional precept in flexibility a couple of years ago. We did a separate consultation on the council tax precept then. That was a shorter consultation, and again, those results were fed into the February meeting. And other organisations and public authorities who rely on the consultation for the precept also do shorter consultations focused on the precept. So it's not without precedent to do a shorter consultation.
Thanks, Graham. I've got 2 members so far, Councillor Nelson and then Councillor Lewis, who've got questions.
Thanks, Chair. And also on the report on the bullet point on page 241, we're looking at developing our wildfire capacity. I'm pleased with that. And also lower down, it talks about a large water carrier to be based at Ellesmere Port. I think that's fantastic news for us across Cheshire. The other one was flooding. Most of the flooding recently and last year took place on people's properties and businesses. I just wonder, because when I travel around, I see a lot of properties now, they've got sandbags outside the properties, which people can put in place when they want. What work are we actually doing with people's properties and businesses to actually mitigate flooding?
Who wants to answer that one?
I can take it. I can take that. I mean, it's not a statutory duty for us, Councillor Nelson. So we do bits, but it's the Environment Agency actually who have that prevention element at the moment. We do some elements of it, but we don't do the sandbag stuff or any of the other elements of it. We are basically a last line of response. And as you know, it's something we've been campaigning for a number of years, is actually a statutory duty around flooding and hopefully the funding that would flow from it as well. But we do small amounts is the honest answer to that at the moment. It's not part of our core prevention offer as it stands.
Thanks. To come back, Chair, I know at the end of the day, it's not our core responsibility, but at the end of the day, I receive reports, well, I've not done for the last couple of weeks, but I see reports when there's a lot of rain about, a lot of people have got flooding incidents, and they seem to go up when it is raining heavy, that we're pumping out people's checking election boxes and stuff like that. So it may not be a core thing, but it's a response that we have to give to people because people are desperate in them times.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Lewis.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My question is about one of the bullet points on page 241 as well. We're going to launch a Cheshire-wide campaign aimed at owners and occupiers of houses of multiple occupation. How much work is being done in terms of the present consultation that's going through on planning? Because obviously, if some of the planning goes through that's been suggested in that consultation, we may find ourselves in situations where buildings that were previously not residential become residential. And I'm just wondering whether there's a possibility of actually elevating the launch of this Cheshire-wide campaign in relation to that. I know it's you're not a statutory consultee in planning. I was informed at a planning meeting that it's building control that deals with fire prevention in properties, and I'm just wondering, what the knowledge is of the fire service with regard to some of the changes that are mooted to be taking place with regard to national planning.
Mark, could you respond?
I can do, yeah. We are. You're absolutely right. Councillor. There is a significant shift in planning rules that's proposed nationally, and we have been responding both individually and also through the National Fire Chiefs Council. Lee Shears, who leads this area for us, has been keeping a sector expertise for the service to some degree, and has been responding and keeping us within that. We're also, and you're right about what you say about local planning issues. Quite often we find out far too late in the process because of our statutory position within that. We're also very grateful to those members that sit on planning committees, and we know that always raise fire as an issue, but also raise the issue with us before they go to those planning committees. And I would ask for you to carry on doing that, actually. But just to give you some assurance, we are and have responded to those national areas at the moment.
Thank you very much.
I've got Councillor Holbrook, Councillor Houston, Councillor Harris wish to.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, it should be interesting with Councillor Lewis's last question. We've got a member training session tomorrow, discussion on the new white paper. So that's something we could perhaps bring up, Councillor Lewis there. I'd like to go back to the question from Steph about flooding. Much of the flooding that happens, certainly the flooding that I'm made aware of locally that happens, is because the grids in the road have not been cleared out for, well, since God's dog was a pup, basically, with some of them. They are absolutely jammed full. I'm just wondering if there is some way that the fire authority can connect with local authorities, just to ask the local authorities to make it a bit of a priority in the next 12 months to take time to check the grids locally, and that when they're reported by councillors that they are dealt with very swiftly, because that would alleviate a lot of the local flooding if the water had somewhere to go rather than flowing down people's drives.
Thank you, Councillor Holbrook. Councillor Houston.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm also looking at page 241 and picking up on the point that's been raised about launching the Cheshire-wide campaign aimed at owners and occupiers of houses in multiple occupation. I am aware that the fire service does a very good job in working with partner agencies when they go into people's homes or they contact landlords and owners, and I think it would be a good opportunity to do more multi-agency work. Certainly I know that the councils would welcome the opportunity to possibly pass out information to those occupiers and to the owners about other issues, as well as fire safety issues such as education on disposal of refuse. We have a lot of problems with houses of multiple occupation where there is fly tipping, especially when people move out, and also their understanding of their responsibilities in using the bins properly. And quite often it could just be a case of using that opportunity to get out an information leaflet or to do joint visits with other officers from different partners. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Yeah, it was just, Chair, to comment on the issue of permitted developments that's come along recently. I don't know whether training issues in local authorities will deal with that, other than what we can't address now. Certainly, I'm not a member of the planning authority at the moment in our authority, but certainly we just had a planning application on Monday evening, which I know the fire service had concerns about, which had to be just effectively dismissed because there are only certain conditions in which you could consider as a planning authority some matters, and it is a shame that concerns by the fire service are not being considered relevant to a planning application because of the limited reasons available for objecting. And I really think at some point in time, as may be appropriate, that needs to be raised by the various fire service.
authorities, because it's obviously going to be a nationwide issue, and we cannot have a situation where the professional fire service officers have got concerns about a planning application and they're just effectively dismissed because of some knee-jerk reaction set of limited reasons for objecting that have been put in place in the middle of a national pandemic.
Thanks. Mark, did you want to respond to any of that?
I think it's difficult from our perspective. We clearly don't want to stray into the politics side of it, but we, from a pure fire perspective, take an active interest in all of these changes. And we do have some reservations about some buildings that were never designed to be built as domestic premises being converted into them, and have a very vested interest in that. And as you know, we already have a couple of local MPs that are working on our behalf with regard to some of the timber frame construction that we saw with buildings like Beechmere. So just to give members an assurance, this is a piece of work. I mean, the summary that's on page 241 is obviously just a summary of the RMP that members signed off just a few weeks ago. And it's good to see the kind of the passion that is there kind of supporting some of this stuff, really. But be under no illusion, we are absolutely pushing as hard as we can to make the buildings and the built environment across Cheshire, but probably nationally as well, as safe as it can possibly be. And that is something that we will keep bringing back to planning days. It feels a bit surreal at the minute because they're all virtual, but be assured, virtual or not, we will be bringing stuff to you around the built environment at some point this year.
Following on from what Councillor Harris said, is there anything that the National Fire Chiefs Council could do? Because I think the comment he made was it is going to be a general thing across the country. So
we are doing a channel. There've been both local and national responses to the changes in building regulations that have, in effect, laid down a marker around the fire safety of those buildings.
That's what I wanted to hear. Yep. Okay. Any other comments or questions on the item 7?
Councillor Nelson, Chair, move the report.
Is that seconded?
Seconded, Chair.
So we happy to accept the recommendations that the members note the approach to the review of the integrated risk management plan for 2020 to 2024 and the potential consultation with regard to the council tax precept for 21-22.
Agreed, Chair.
Well, thank you very much. That brings us to the end of the meeting, which normally we'd be queuing up for lunch in Sadler Road, but today we're not. But thank you for your contributions and your attendance on the virtual meeting today. I do hope that sometime in the very near future we can all meet together in the same room. But until that happens, stay safe and keep well if you can. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Can I just apologise for my late arrival? It was down to technical difficulties, can I say?
Well, get in touch with IT, because if they can help you.